The Annulus. Journey into the unknown. Through the vortex. Y. Seng-Young. Copyright at 2020 Y. Seng-Young. All rights reserved. The characters and events portrayed in this book are fictitious. Any similarity to real persons, living or dead, is coincidental and not intended by the author. No part of this book may be reproduced, or stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, or otherwise, without express written permission of the publisher. Chapter 12. At Chernobyl. The team of Professor Gerald Brown, Ken Harding, and Waterston, and the scientific support staff flew in by military transport to Kiev and then to the nearest safe rendezvous point outside the Chernobyl exclusion zone at Pripyat. Also airlifted the night before were 2 NBC-equipped APCs and other similarly equipped military vehicles. Their convoy left Pripyat and headed for Chernobyl Power Station, where in 1986 Reactor No. 4 suffered an explosion that took out the entire roof of the reactor building and let off the extensive radiation contamination of the entire area and large stretches of the Ukraine. Professor Brown, Ken Harding, and sat in the second APC piloted by Master Sergeant Manning and Captain Evans as vehicle commander. Colonel Owens led in the front vehicle as task force commander with Ron and Alistair. The other scientists and technicians followed with the team equipment in the other vehicles. As they rolled past the security guard post of the Chernobyl plant perimeter, the radiation sensors in the APC were showing heightened levels of radiation more than the usual observed levels as reported by the Ukrainians to the IAEA. They pulled into the covered vehicle bay within the compound and crews in NBC suits sprayed down the exterior of their vehicles prior to their disembarkation. They went straight into a clean room and were given clean room suits by the personnel attending to them. When they were suited up, minus their air-breathing equipment and helmets, they were shown into a meeting room. A distinguished-looking man with grey hair entered the room and Professor Brown and Alistair both stood up to greet him. Ken Harding recognized the man as Professor Anatoly Bykov, head of the Institute of Nuclear Research of Kiev specializing in nuclear and subatomic particle research. He also stepped forward to greet him. Professor Brown, Professor Anatoly, it has been a while since we last met at the physics seminar at Geneva. How are you? Professor Anatoly took Professor Brown's extended hand and shook it hard and then gave him a warm bear hug. Professor Brown, Gerald, is it not, my old friend? I am well. I hope you and your family are well too, and please call me Anatoly. Seeing there were 2 others beside Professor Brown, Professor Anatoly turned to address them. Now this is not young Alistair. I remember you from the Nuclear Security Conference in Rome where you presented a paper on threat of nuclear materials as urban terrorist weapons, the dirty bomb. No, is it not? Alistair stepped forward and shook Professor Anatoly's hand too and smiled from ear to ear. It is my honor that someone as distinguished as you can remember me and the simple paper I presented almost 3 years ago. Ken Harding, Professor Anatoly, I am Ken Harding, and it is an honor to finally meet up with you. I follow your scientific papers presented to the 10th conference organized by the European Organization for Nuclear Research, CERN, in Geneva. I regret not able to meet up with you after your paper on recent research on subatomic particles at the Max Planck Society in Germany last year. Professor Brown turned to Ken. This is Dr. Ken Harding, who has authored various papers on subatomic particles and parallel universes that European physicists seem to show more interest than their US counterparts. But never mind the consensus view, we can all rest assured the incidents with these light cloud entities we are experiencing now will make Ken a genius and all the rest of us detractors a bunch of old fools. Professor Anatoly, Dr. Ken Harding, I know of your work. It is indeed my pleasure to finally meet you too. Ken, no, Professor Anatoly, we finally meet, and the pleasure and honor is all mine. The team set up their equipment inside the plant control center, which had been upgraded using additional shielding and air filtration systems the Americans brought with them to retrofit the very run-down premises they now have to operate from. Professor Brown and Ken Harding settled down at their assigned stations and looked through their analyses of the readings from the Defender unit in the dome at Sun Valley and the more recent general sensor readings taken at Diablo Canyon. with necessary clearance from CIA and Homeland Security departments and final permission of the White House, the data had been sent in advance to the Ukrainian and Russian research institutes for analysis. Professor Brown, Anatoly, this is our analysis of the data transmissions we monitored at the recent incidents we had at Sun Valley and Diablo Canyon. Professor Anatoly examined the results of the analysis and said, "Your conclusions are like what our communication specialists have come up with. The transmissions at Diablo Canyon readings bear similarities to various multiplex signal transmission techniques undergoing advanced research in laboratories in various European research agencies." Colonel Owens and Captain Evans joined them in the discussion. Captain Evans, being a specialist in communications, had participated in the analysis of the data, took one good look at the report and whispered in Colonel Owens' ears, "Colonel, the Europeans are also researching similar multiplex signal transmission techniques as our NSA. Would we admit we are doing the same research as they are by sharing this information?" Colonel Owen thought for a moment, waved his hand to assure Captain Evan of his concerns. Colonel Owen, Professor Anatoly, seems like the American and Ukrainian experts had made the same observation. The transmission mode was set up for exceptionally long transmission distances. Captain Evans will elaborate. Captain Evans, our communication experts believe that these carrier band signatures indicate transmission at burst speeds close to the speed of light. These signal transmissions are set up to carry over extremely long distances, maybe even to the stars far away from our solar system. Ken, let us not overlook that the time reading of the transmission data stream from the Defender unit matches the time of video capture of the first sighting of a light cloud over Chernobyl and also at Fukushima as reported by the Japanese. They all gathered around the display screen showing the videos from closed-circuit cameras at Chernobyl that captured the arrival of the light clouds. Professor Brown looked at the data held by Professor Anatoly and the potential outcome worried them. Professor Anatoly, Gerald, we were fortunate to have cameras that filmed the incident the instant the Chernobyl security personnel reported the blue flashes of light in the sky. The footage here shows the vortex appearing over the turbine house and then shortly after the light cloud started to emerge from the vortex. Readings we are now taking of the vortex above the turbine house has the same signature as that of the blue circle inside the dome at Sun Valley and Diablo Canyon, only the strength of the energy readings is at least 100% higher magnitude that of the dome you had in Diablo Canyon, which was again 40 to 50% higher than that at Sun Valley. If this vortex grows any larger, the entire Chernobyl complex may be engulfed. If that happens, what then will be the outcome? Professor Gerald, Ken has this theory that these entities must have come to mine for mass, and their encounters with human life may have happened by accident. Ken took up the thread of the discussion, the Super Slide incident being their first encounter on Earth was some sort of scouting mission and the disappearance of the boy Jake was only an accident. Since then, we had the Tijuana and the Diablo Canyon incidents where the helicopter crews were returned unharmed but totally confused about what happened. Professors Brown and Anatoly both nodded their heads in agreement. Professor Brown, can you have formulated a hypothesis about their purpose at each of their appearances? Mass collection seems to be their modus operandi, but what is their prime objective? Ken, we do not know the chemistry or physiology of these light cloud entities, and with so little data collected, most of which we cannot interpret except by comparison to any close equivalent we have in our science. Based on their actions, can we even guess that these entities are alive according to our ideas of carbon-based terrestrial life form? Professor Brown, we can only surmise if their chemical periodicity is like ours. If so, they should be using the basic building blocks in the creation of life forms. But whether these entities are life forms or not, their behavior shows certain consistency as well as patterns of learning behavior. These entities started with the chance encounter at Orlando with the aluminium chute of that water slide, progressed to scrap iron at Tijuana and Sun Valley, and then went after spent nuclear fuel at Diablo Canyon, and now at Chernobyl. Their actions seem to have driven by the mining of ever higher atomic mass material and most recently radioactive materials. Ken waved a few graphs and spectrum analysis charts. Professor Anatoly, George, if we look at this spectral analysis incorporating my time shift algorithms, we can see that the spike of energy here and here, their emissions are X-ray wavelength, and they are like our electronic microscopes used in spectrometric chemical analysis. And so they zap their surroundings and identify the heavy materials and transfer them to where they came from. Ken, our depleted uranium armor from our M1A2 tanks and our Defender robot must have introduced them to radioactive metallic elements. And, hello Professor Anatoly, I am honored to meet you. I am Waterston. I have this simple question to ask, for what purpose do they need these heavy metals? Professor Anatoly, Ms. Waterston, pleasure to meet you too. We all agree that is what you Americans say, the $64 million question. Professor Brown, we all agree that that is the key to understanding and resolving the situation we are faced with. We cannot learn anymore using remote instrumentation and sensors. The most useful results were from the Defender unit when we decided to send it into the vortex. But the communications were cut off only after a few short minutes. We need to send an autonomous unit that can use all means to maintain contact with the home base. And that means we should send a team into the vortex. I want to be on that team. Professor Brown, and, hold it. What I say does not mean we send a team of human observers through the vortex. Ken, Gerald, and is right. We do not have the time to use instruments even if we mount it on a unit to send through the vortex to the other side. Chernobyl may go critical at any time, and not to mention Fukushima is not even being considered. And after the experience with the Defender unit, how do we ensure that we can maintain contact with the new unit we send through? Colonel Owens, right now, we have the orders of both the Presidents of the United States of America to prevent these light cloud entities from endangering Chernobyl. The United Nations, Britain, France, Ukraine, China, and Japan are all in agreement of this objective. I will hear your views on the way forward and then consult with General Wayne and other experts to formulate a plan of action. And I want to be on the team. I have to go through the vortex. Colonel Owens, I will make my recommendations to the President of USA, and Professor Anatoly will do the same to the President of Ukraine. That is all. Everyone back to your jobs on hand. The next briefing will be at 1400 hours today. Captain Evans was speaking with Ron. Well, I do not care what your civilians are saying about their appetite, but they consumed the entire No. 1 Squadron of my 11th Armored Cavalry and destroyed Flight A of the 140th Assault Helicopter Battalion. I cannot wait to get my hands on them. Alistair, Captain Evans, I do not know who you are taking orders from. Our orders are direct from the President, and we are not to take military action except in self-preservation and defense. Professor Brown, I do not believe our weapons have any effect on them. We have seen our futile attacks on them previously. But what is more important is the question, who is the enemy, if there is an enemy to begin with? I do not think they have any evil intentions, as it seems likely it is mining for heavy metals is all that they are after. Their appearance over Chernobyl cannot be a coincidence, as they must have learnt to track similar radioactive signatures around the Earth. Chernobyl would be an obvious target, just like Fukushima. Professor Anatoly, Dr. Ken, your observations seem to a fair assessment, as the Japanese reported their appearance over Fukushima at the same time. And we can hypothesize these two locations are not chosen by chance by the light clouds or their controllers. But we still do not understand their technology, and why are they transferring the mass? Ron Annan, who had been watching the light clouds over the turbine house area, came back into the control building and joined them. If we can get a message through to my son, maybe he can help us communicate with them. Professor Brown, Ron, if we can think of a way that can work, we would have done it. Ken, look at all that has happened. A. Jake went through, we hope safely. The helicopter crews came back unhurt. B. Mass transfer seems to be what they want. C. They first show a preference for iron. D. And now they only want heavy radioactive elements. E. There are shielding materials that seem to stop the light clouds. Ron, so it is heavy metals they want. The more radioactive it seems, the better. Then why did they take my son Jake? Professor Brown, so we all agree on the obvious. Heavy metals are they are looking for. The more radioactive it seems, the better. And we need to communicate with them. If they will not come to us, we need to go to them. Alistair, everyone, look at this indication of the radiation levels in the immediate area of the turbine house. I do not like what I am seeing. and activated the display monitor showing the camera views of the equipment that she had set up to film the light clouds over the turbine house. All of them in the control building watched in mixture of awe and fear as the cameras showed images of the purplish light dome that had appeared and now engulfed the entire turbine house. The radiation alarms on the control desk went from light orange into the dark orange zone. The situation was taking a turn for the worst.